This is Andrew Hada from Nothing Ventured Media. I want to tell you about all the feature films we've made and how you can see them right now. The last one is a zombie drama about how a pandemic and isolation could drive a group of people mad. When the virus hits, John finds himself alone and scared until he meets Michael, his protector. But when Karina, another survivor, enters the mix, everything that John and Michael knew will be turned on its head. The last one's a zombie virus movie that's somehow even more relevant today. Plus, it has zombies. Check it out. Borderland is a mexploitation film about living in El Paso. When Sarah finds herself in debt to the cartels, she has until sunrise to find some missing monies with the help of her executioner. Borderland is a true midnight movie and a lot of fun. The documentary Humble Spirits tells the story of the Hahn family, including champion Jennifer Hahn from El Paso, Texas. The entire Hahn family has grown up in the combat sports and has helped shape who they are both in and out of the ring. Humble Spirits, A Family of Fighters, is the perfect documentary for boxing fans of all ages. Finally, The Empty Space, winner of multiple awards, including the Sacramento Horror Film Festival's Best of the Fest, is a cosmic horror about Amy Andrews, who's dealing with anxiety and depression after a violent attack that killed her husband. As she tries to find herself, she starts to lose her grasp on reality. Or could it be something much more sinister? The Empty Space is full of twists and turns, with Grace DeWilder of Rue Morgue magazine calling it a powerful film full of excellent performances by practically every cast member. All of Andrew Hada's movies are available to rent or buy on streaming services such as Tubi, Amazon, and many other places. And if that's not enough for you, Hada Films is home to all of our short films. So take a look around and see what you like. Spend your day with Hada Films and Nothing Ventured Media. Now, let's start the bomb squad. What's up, guys? It's Andrew Hada with the Bomb Squad. I'm director Andrew Hada. This is William Murdoch and Josh Whitney Epp, his social security number. I feel like I haven't been introducing myself or ourselves lately, so I wanted to do that as we begin. Go check out the movies that we've made. Also, today on this episode, we're covering 2007's David Fincher opus Zodiac, starring Mark Ruffalo as a police officer, starring Jake Gyllenhaal as Robert Graysmith, a psychopath, starring Robert Downey Jr. as Roger Avery. Interesting note about that. It was actually supposed to be Brad Pitt, but he had to do some other terrible movie. So I don't know. We'll talk about whether that would have worked or not. And then also starring.
What did he do instead?
I think it was, I don't remember, but it was some movie that wasn't as remembered nowadays.
Oh.
But so yeah, it also stars Brian Cox. It stars Chloe Sevigny. I just wanted to find a name I couldn't pronounce. Anthony Edwards. Oh, and then of course John Carroll Lynch, who's great in everything he's ever been in. And because his name was John, and that sounds like Josh is gonna tell us what this movie is about. Josh, what is Zodiac about? Using only Zodiac symbols.
Give it to us in a code.
The Libra balance of the film shows that the Sagittarius ways of the I don't know. It's about the Zodiac kills people.
I know.
And then both the cops and the media are like, what's up with this guy? And then eventually they kind of find out what's up with this
and
guy.
Eventually they stop asking.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is kind of about I think it ends up being about a 20-year journey of the Zodiac Killer. We follow Robert Graysmith. Robert Graysmith started as a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle. This is real life stuff that I'm not stepping over Josh's. I'm giving you the real
right. Yeah.
This is all a true story.
Yeah.
I would argue this is almost too true of a story.
Right.
But we'll get into that.
So yeah, Robert Graysmith started as a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, and then eventually he wrote the definitive book on the Zodiac, which is simply titled Zodiac. Since then, it's kind of been more in contentious, but it's kind of like Helter Skelter, where for a very long time it was kind of taken as the Bible. It still kind of is. I just finished reading it. And so they're using that as a basis. The Zodiac famously has never been caught, which is kind of one of the main themes of the film. It is also Zodiac killings were very strange, just because he would switch up his mode, which is against everything. But we'll get into it as we talk about it. So, guys, what did you think of 2007's Zodiac?
I mean, Zodiac is like, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's like learning that this movie was a bomb is so crazy. And I remember like when I first read about that, it was like Fincher was, I couldn't find this again online. I didn't like look for it, but I'm pretty sure I read one time that Fincher was like so surprised that like The Social Network got like so much praise and that everybody loved it so much. And he was mad because he feels like Zodiac up until that point was like the best thing he'd ever made. And watching it, like, it makes sense that this isn't like a huge hit because it is like what we were just talking about. Like it's a long sprawling case where no answers are really given, but like the performances are all just so good and the vibe is just like so awesome. And it's like this country going into this kind of like psychedelic zone of life, and like sin and evil are taking over the world. So people think like the paranoia, yet also the normalcy of life, I feel like really come together in this movie in a way that you don't see in a lot of movies.
Right.
And it's great. It's so good. 10 out of 10 already. Yeah.
Yeah. 10 out. And like, yeah, it is funny, especially with, it's one of those movies where I feel like it failed because of not Fincher, but because of Fincher's name. I think a lot of people were expecting this to kind of be Seven again. And
like
it's
a thriller.
Yeah, it's
Totally.
a very different film. And he does use
I would argue it's an anti-thriller.
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
It is kind of like, and it's that thing where, just reading about some of the production history, originally this movie was going to be kind of like, they were going to use Robert Graysmith's book, but it was going to be a reimagining in Los Angeles. This movie takes place in San Francisco. In Los Angeles, about the Zodiac coming out. That movie has been made a billion times. We were just talking before we started about Awakening the Zodiac with Leslie Bibb. And so David Fincher didn't want to do that. He wanted to make kind of this accurate representation of how the town and the people involved were kind of affected by the Zodiac killings. And honestly, to me, that's always like my favorite part. I think... the murders are the least interesting thing of any case, like the Manson family and this one and like the BTK. It's more so like, to me at least, it's like, how did the cops react? How did the public react? There's that famous there's that famous thing where Steve McQueen was like walking around with a gun during the Manson murders. And to me, that's interesting, like how paranoid everyone gets. And that's kind of what this movie ends up being about. So I think that works,
Yeah, it's okay. I know what you're gonna say. You know me. I always judge a movie's length.
There's gonna be a comparison coming up. I can get
perhaps too harshly. I think this movie is too short, and I know this movie's 2 hours and 40 minutes.
Okay,
but I almost feel like the thesis of the film works better. I don't know. Well, we can kind of get into it as it goes along, because I think like the biggest thing about this movie is it actually starts, and actually, I don't like this movie because it is really long and nothing happens for most of it. But
which is fair. I think that's why it bombed.
It starts with like this amazing scene of this couple getting like accosted by what you think is the Zodiac, and probably is. Everything is ambiguous in this movie, which I think is one of its strengths. And it's like this incredible scene. I mean, David Fincher's so good at directing. He's just every scene in this looks good. It's very, but you almost get this like structurally, it's this like building thing where you see like, oh, this murder, this almost murder, and it's like you are the public in the Bay Area, and then eventually the country, getting this heightened sense of like, oh, like what's happening, what's going to happen next, like we don't know. And then it all just kind of is just like, oh, and then nothing, and then suddenly it all just kind of like dissipates because they didn't catch him, and then it's just like, oh yeah, by the way, 20 years later, here's what's happening, and you're like, oh, it's like structurally, it's very like the first half and second half are very different, and obviously it's intentional.
Sure.
but it's very interesting the way they
And
do it.
I will say, I
Yeah.
do want to talk on this time. I mean, it's that thing where a lot of times you're watching a movie, and even movies you love, you're not necessarily trying to critique every single scene. You're just trying to like enjoy it as it is. I will say that in this movie, when I watched it again, there was a little thing that I noticed in the second half, which we'll get to as we get there. But I think one of the genius things about this movie in particular, like I said, I read in Helter Skelter, they kind of cover this a lot, like the aftermath of the murders, how it affected people. There's also like a really good podcast called Hollywood and the Manson Murders, where it kind of covers that. But like in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is like the best Manson murder movie, they don't really go into that because it ends that night. Same thing with Helter Skelter. They deal with the trial, but they don't deal with the community because there's just that book is huge, so the movie kind of condensed it all down. And I think this movie, it ends up not being so much about the Zodiac killings. It ends up being about how people reacted to the Zodiac killings, which
Yeah.
there's also like Son of Sam by Spike Lee that does it a little bit. I think this one does it a better job because Spike Lee's, I mean, he likes to do kind of a little bit more caricatures of people. And so in this one, when he's like, there's that first scene that Josh is talking about, and it's so good because like the guy, like it's like a teen and he's going to see this girl. And he's like, "Oh, let me drive," and she's like, "Just get in the car," But every conversation feels very real, and I think that you need that kind of groundedness if you're gonna tell this story of how this kind of community was shaken by this series of murders. And
Totally.
it's like it's such a funny, like, you have that hardcore murder scene, and then the opening credits is like following that first letter, and it's like very exciting, like the music is like, it's pretty, like it's that 70s kind of pop song. And it's that thing where it's like Fincher is almost telling you like, no, this is the meat of the film, how this like newspaper is going to react to getting the letter, and that's really what we spend a lot of time on.
And especially in the news station too, like that's where like that's like a bulk of the scenes. Like they're like the way they shoot the lights, they have to make the place look cool because like we are there for like a long time. And one thing I want to add too about the opening scene, and going about how this movie is mostly about like how society takes the murders. It's like less about the details, even though it's very detail heavy. But using that Hurdy-Gurdy Man song is like such a cool choice because song. Like and I don't think that it was like the first psychedelic song to be ever be recorded, but that was one of the first ones that like really kind of shot psychedelic music into like the foreground of like pop music. And I feel like this movie is kind of about like a changing of the generations. Like it's all about like the loss of like Christian values that people are seeing with all these like serial killer cases coming out. And it's kind of like America's on the it's 1969, it's the summer of love. It's like all these things are shifting in the culture. And I think that by starting off with Hurdy-Gurdy Man, because when you hear Hurdy-Gurdy Man, those lyrics, and this hulking guy is coming at you, you kind of think that he's the Hurdy-Gurdy Man in a way. Like, and it makes that song even scarier. Which is kind of a creepy song, even though it's cool. And I feel like I was really like, I've always loved that opening, but it really hit me last night when I was watching. I was just like, dude, this is like, he's Anton Chigurh. In No Country. He's like the change that you can't stop. Like that's kind of what these serial killers was, like the American people seeing like the loss of their values, which is pretty wild.
And I think one of the great things about this, and it's something that he touched on in Seven, is that the big thing about the Zodiac is that, Manson was racist, some of the other ones got sexual gratification or whatever, but the Zodiac, we don't really know why he picked his victims or how. Like, there's some connection with suspects that we learn as we go along. But it was this kind of like, we're moving away from the like 60s, 70s kind of like order, law and order. And like the Zodiac kind of represents this force of nature, like William was saying, where it's like, he's changing, like his only real goal is to murder as many people as he can. And like, but there's nothing behind, like, it doesn't seem like there's any ulterior motives. It doesn't seem like he's picking people. Like, his second murder is he kills like a taxi driver. And well, one thing is that Fincher didn't want to show any murders where they didn't have eyewitness accounts. So anyone where everyone was killed, he didn't cover those because he didn't want to like misrepresent them. And that's why he started the 4th of July one. But it's also funny because it's the 4th of July, there's like fireworks. it
Yeah.
adds that
The
kind
birth
of
of
like
America.
he's here to stop this kind of dream that America is having at the moment, you know, and like
Totally, absolutely.
that
I didn't even
that
put that
kind
together, but for
yeah.
sure.
And I think that that's an, and like it's funny too because you kind of see how things move. Where at the beginning they get this letter from the killer, and then they're like, "Can you verify any of this?" To Robert Downey Jr. plays Robert Avery, who's their investigative reporter, and Avery's like, "I cover crimes in Vallejo because it's like the next town over where this murder happened," and
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, like do it, like, but it was kind of this thing too where at that time we were realizing that we were a lot more connected than we were, you know, like because before the
Totally.
60s it was still hard to like get from town to town, you know. It's not like now where you just drive to San Francisco for vacation. And so
Right.
it is this thing where it's like he was able to kind of take advantage of getting ahead of the fact that now that we have interstate and cars, it was easy to go from San Francisco to Vallejo to this other town and commit these murders, and the cops would
Yeah.
like not talk to each other. So it's like
Right.
Yeah,
Right. They hadn't. They
they're
didn't really
having
need
a
there's
to
no
hard
before.
time. Yeah,
cooperation.
Because there's even that part
Yeah,
later in the
it
movie where
was.
like Robert, like where Downey Jr. has to go to a different city, and he's talking. Gyllenhaal's telling Chloe Sevigny about it, and he's like, "It's going on to Riverside. Where is Riverside?" And it's like, dude, I'm from New Mexico, and I know where Riverside is compared to San Francisco.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So it's like that's so
No, it's
true.
very, yeah, it is. It's very like, it's like the speed of commerce outpaced like the speed of
yeah,
bureaucracy, and then it was like taking bureaucracy like decades to catch up to
right,
like, oh, you could shoot someone, then the next county over shoot someone else, and those cops would never connect the
yeah,
two,
Right.
you
right,
know. Even like for an international like, or I guess a national news story like Zodiac, they were like just not even like willing to
right,
work together, and probably legally couldn't. It was just some sort of like structural
yeah,
thing,
Right.
you
They, why
know.
would they have these like
Yeah.
regulations and like what do you call them things to do whenever you don't have to? You never talk to their cities, so why have an infrastructure there on how to deal with each other?
exactly,
You don't
right,
need one
right,
yet. Yeah.
yeah, and
Can I just say though, you know, I know Andrew is a real serial killer head. He loves serial killers. He's in love with most of
Yeah.
them.
He writes them letters
mhm.
to the
And
grave.
he was one of the ones sending to Manson, being like, "Can I
I'm
marry
like,
you
Yeah.
hey,
if you
you're
get out?"
dead? What the hell?
Yeah. Where are these
Like
being delivered
I
to?
am way behind on my
Yeah,
books. I'm catching up. I started in the
yeah,
70s
Yeah.
and I'm researching my way forward. No, but you know, yeah, it only shows like certain murders where someone lived, or attempted murders, you know, in some cases. The one where there's like a couple on a picnic blanket and he's wearing this watchman ass
yeah,
costume to
Yeah. I
like
know.
yeah,
hold him at
He has a
gunpoint.
bag on his
I
head.
was like, oh yeah, serial killers are stupid
right,
assholes. Like I was just like, oh right, they're all like
yeah,
annoying,
Right.
you
They're
know,
creepy
like they're
dudes.
all
Yeah.
just like mentally ill, like,
and
you know, a guy
Lords.
who would just
Yeah.
be on 4chan
and
today,
I
Yeah.
you
think
Yeah.
know.
4chan for sure.
when you study like serial killers, that's one of like the big reveals is that a lot of times, like in this movie, once he kills that, before we get to that lake scene, because it's really good, but before he kills that, before he goes there, when he kills the taxi driver, he like they're like watching him and they're like testing him, but like he like calls and he's sending these letters, so he clearly like wants to be known. He gives himself that Zodiac name. It's like silly, like he's sending
Yeah.
ciphers, but like what you realize is a lot of it is just cops being bad. Like, oh, was Charles Manson like a criminal genius? Was the Zodiac a criminal genius? I don't know, because once he killed that taxi driver, he was walking down the street covered in blood. Two cops saw
Right.
him, and they let him go because at the time the suspect was black and this guy was white.
Right.
No
And it's
way,
Right.
like,
yeah.
okay, but
Yeah.
also, why did you let a guy covered in blood just walk away? You know, even
Right.
if that
Even though
wasn't your
there
suspect.
yeah, there could be two murderers.
Yeah.
Like you're going to a crime scene and
You're
you
in
see
a
a bloody guy.
giant
But
town.
but
Right.
that's even like as this is happening, because again, you're kind of learning things as the
Right.
public does, and in the second half is like it's basically for the most part Jake Gyllenhaal like slowly piecing it together. You find out where it's like, oh, this guy had like all this evidence. Why didn't he report it to the police? It's like, oh, he did. They just like did a report
Right.
and never followed. You know, it's like
Right.
there's like dozens of those. You
Yeah.
know, where it's just like, all the pieces existed, and people were calling and giving like full detailed descriptions, and no one.
And even back
and they were
then,
talking about
go ahead. No.
Well, they were talking about like how there's like one scene where they're like, this is gonna bring out the crazies, and it's like they must have like it was such a media sensation that it was just like, how could you possibly sort through all that information like in a realistic way? Like unless you have all city departments just like only doing Zodiac, like I don't know, like it's unfortunate, but it's I'm a little bit siding with the cops here, where it's like I don't know, I can see. Sometimes I forget to watch the dish.
There's a
like,
part where he threatens some school, and they have to release that he's threatening school children to like keep the kids safe and let the public know because it's too big of a risk, and they know that that's going to unlock all the floodgates. And there's a part where the chief goes up to Mark Ruffalo's character, who's playing the leading detective, and he goes, "Any leads?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, right now we have about 300 suspects every hour."
Yeah,
and it's like,
that's
well, and now,
oh my god,
it's they even do. There's a big TV show where they're like, we're gonna catch him when he calls in, and of course, just a mentally ill guy calls in claiming to be him and just tricks like the entire police force. You know, it's just like, there were so many like wannabes, and even I think they were even like, oh yeah, and then the Zodiac even like would lie in his letters to throw them off. So it's like they would never know if, like what was true.
Yeah, because he would take credit for murders that they later found out he couldn't have been involved in, or they thought that, or they caught the killer already, or they had caught him later. So they figured out like, okay, he was lying about this, but then he clearly, like whoever was writing those letters, clearly knew enough about specific murders that they could accurately say like, no, this guy killed him. I think he was even like mentioning the bullets he used, the kind of like where he positioned the bodies. So it's like the only one who could have known that was the killer, but then he would also lie about other shit. And it's like, it's hard to piece together this puzzle when someone is giving you the wrong clues, but he's also the only person giving you any clues, you know?
Right. Okay, so where are we at? And okay, so we have the first murder.
Yeah.
We have the letter getting to the news station. What happens next?
So now we do the taxi driver, and
that's
where we really get introduced to Mark Ruffalo and his partner, and they're like, one of the things is that he always wants animal crackers. Like, it's funny how Mark Ruffalo plays this this detective Toshki, because he's also technically, this character ends up being the basis for Dirty Harry, but Mark Ruffalo plays him kind of like your cool uncle. Who's like,
he's a very peaceful cop. Like he's like funny kind of.
Because he'll be like, "Oh, do you have any animal crackers?" And they're like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "I just like snacks." And it's like, what? You're in a murder scene.
I always thought that was because he wanted to stop smoking or something. But like I always think that, but they never mention that in the movie. Yeah, it seems like such like a not smoker kind of thing to do.
Yeah. And then there's
I could see Fincher like honing in on that as like one detail.
And there's a really good part in that scene where he goes and talks to the neighbors, and the neighbor is like, "Oh, my kids saw that murder," and he's like, "Oh, I need to talk to your kids," and he's like, "Well, can you do it later? They just saw a murder, they're pretty traumatized." And Mark Ruffalo doesn't say that they can do it later. He doesn't say that he's gonna force them to talk, but he's just kind of like, "Yeah, I know that." But we need to do this. And it's like, in that foul swoop, you see how he's effective as a detective, because he's able to kind of be assertive without like pushing the people out of the way and doing it,
Like the exact opposite of Dirty Harry. Like couldn't be more different. Yeah. And then we talk to the kids. Like, it's funny because like the kids are also like are not even that shaken up. They're just like, yeah, he ran away and he looked normal. It's like that's what kids do. They're just like, it was fucking wild, dude.
Yeah, like that was.
What else
weird.
do you want to know?
Yeah.
But no, that this is essentially when I think the lake scene, like the murder,
which is one of the most chilling scenes ever.
This is chilling scenes. But he does look so stupid during.
I think that's what makes it good, because it's that thing where it's like, so he walks up on these two couples, and like at first the girl's like, "Hey, there's a guy out there," and the guy's kind of like, "Okay, like it's a lake," like what?
Right.
And then
people are loud.
Yeah. Eventually, she's like, "Oh, he has a gun," and she's like trying to get him up, and they finally see it. And I think the fact, and I can probably guess this is what happened in real life, like, the fact that he looks kind of dumb And because he's in this outfit, he's in a completely black square hat. He's in like kind of like this makeshift outfit.
Doesn't he
And
have
he has
like
the
the
Zodiac
Zodiac
logo on his
logo
back,
Yeah,
on
like
it?
Superman.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
looks like Hooded
he
Justice
looks
for
Watchmen.
Watchmen.
That was a good. I never. That's a good
yeah.
call.
And I
Like, just
think like
stupid.
Yeah.
it's funny because it does like Fincher doesn't make this guy look very scary, but it's
Right.
so you kind of like
Yeah.
are in the couple shoes where at first you're like, is this guy robbing us? Is he serious about this? And then
Right.
the Zodiac has them tie each other up, and then eventually like he has them on the ground. And the guy's like kind of being defiant, but not really, because he's like, you can take my wallet, just leave. And then there's a point where he's like, get on the ground, and the guy's like, we could get hurt if we're on the ground all night,
Right.
which is
Yeah. He's
like,
like
buddy,
pleading with like angry logic,
you're
like
about to be
angry rich
murdered.
white dude logic. Yeah.
But like no, because it's like oh, you think like oh he's hiding his face, so
Yeah,
he just wants money and to get
Yeah.
away. And Zodiac's even like I'm an escaped convict from
yeah,
Missouri, or he says some shit. No, I think the fact that he looks stupid
yeah.
almost makes it scarier because it's like oh this guy thinks this is tough. He's clearly a
Right,
crazy
right.
Right.
person,
Right.
you
And then
know, and he
there's the
is. I
best
mean
part where the
ultimately,
guy's like, "Was that gun even loaded? I want
Yeah.
to just
Yeah.
in case they're gonna ask." And Zodiac like gets right next to him. He pulls out the gun and he pulls out the thing and shows it it's bullet. And it's like in that moment
Ugh.
you realize that they are fucked. Like that's it for them,
Right. Right.
And then he ends up stabbing
And
the both of
the
them.
Mexico line is like it makes the stabbing part so much worse because you're like even like as an audience member and you know he's the Zodiac, you're like
Yeah.
he's just gonna go. It's fine.
I think
And
even
then
watching it
no.
again, you always hope that he's just gonna leave.
Yeah.
And like it's kind of like that Nope situation, the movie Nope, where it's like, getting stabbed is bad, but getting stabbed where you're also hogtied and you like can't even cover yourself or the wounds has to be like the
Right.
scariest thing ever.
yeah,
Because like, and the guy ends up
and
living. I think the girl ends up passing away,
yeah, she
Yeah.
dies,
which
he
Yeah.
is like
lives, yeah,
subtly like they're showing you right away that Zodiac is going to be more harsh on the women, which was true.
Right.
Um,
Right. He finished because both of the men survived.
yeah, because
I think, right?
yeah.
I thought that was just luck. Didn't that guy get
It
shot in the
was
neck?
it
I
was
don't
a
know.
bit of
Maybe.
luck
Who
where
knows?
like they had to survive some pretty nasty wounds, but it was also that the Zodiac would make sure the women wouldn't survive, and he didn't really
Right.
care.
Right.
Like he would shoot the guy
Mm,
and then really take his time with the girl and not even notice if
Hmm.
the guy lived or died. And so
Right.
it was kind of playing into what he thought about women, but it's interesting in just that fact that like you can put yourself in that role of like you're in the middle of nowhere, you're tied up, and now you're being stabbed a bunch of times. It's like that's
Dude.
terrifying.
And it's like there's no music and like
Yeah.
you barely even see the guy getting stabbed. Like
Right.
it's like a close up of his face, like from like kind of like a downward angle, and like
Mhm.
he gets behind him and just like you see him do it,
Yeah.
and it's just the guy like going like, oh, and it's
Yeah.
like that's what it would be like to just start
He
getting
can only
stabbed.
do
Like there's
that.
no intro music. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you just get stabbed. That's what's happening in life, and
Yeah.
it's like so awful. And it's like when you were talking about being hogtied. It's like yeah, if you start getting stabbed, this guy's just psycho. Because like if you wanted to kill him, just shoot him in the head with your already loaded gun.
Right.
Like doing it this way just shows like this guy just wants to stab some people a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Which is horrifying. Yeah.
And I think that's what makes the investigation why kind of like because then like Roger Avery writes something in the paper about how this guy sucks, like the Zodiac killer's bad, and so the Zodiac
He
killer
calls him a latent homosexual.
which in the '60s was terrible.
Right. Right.
And then they start.
See,
Oh, go
well, this is where yeah, because like he's like targeting Roger Avery, which is RDJ, and it's him and Jake Gyllenhaal's character Grace Smith kind of come together, and this is almost this is again part of the like building momentum. Is like oh these two are so good together, they have this like bonding
Yeah.
thing in like a bar.
Oh, that is a fun
because
part.
Yeah, because Paul Avery's like a
he's
real
like
talker,
Yeah.
and then Jake Gyllenhaal's like a Boy Scout versus like
yeah,
a
it's like I don't
Wolverine
know,
coke
yeah.
doing guy.
And he orders this super fruity drink, like an aqua
Yeah.
verba or something, and he's like, "What is that?" He's like, "Hey, don't make fun of it till you try it." And then it
Yeah.
cuts to they've had
Yeah,
like 12.
that's so good.
And it's like a
It's
good,
so funny.
yeah, no, and it's like, and kind of it's them teaming up because he's like the reporter on it, and I love the fact that Grace Smith, Jake Gyllenhaal, is a political cartoonist because back in back in like college, I like love doing like webcomic stuff, but political cartoons really are like the dumbest. Like, oh, here's a water balloon that says taxes, so that the
Right,
guy's gonna
right.
pop it. You know, it's just
It's
like
just
just
caricatures,
brain
yeah.
dead shit. You know, and it's never gotten better. They've been bad for
Yeah.
100 years. So it's like, of course, a guy who's like that's his whole job would be bored and like being like, you know what, I'm gonna get really into this Zodiac
Right.
investigation. And he starts like looking into it on his own time. And then Robert Downey Jr. is like, oh, let's kind of
Yeah.
like meet up and we'll kind of team up a little bit to kind of do
Yeah.
it, you know. And it's a very good
Yeah.
friendship, but it's part of that like where you're like, oh, this is a thriller, they're gonna catch him, you know, and then it's like this building thing, and then that's really not that, but it's like at the moment you're like, this is it, they're getting together, they're gonna go all in on this
Yeah.
Because they kind of make
together, you know.
RDJ like sort of like
And
a
it's
rock star journalist. Like he
Mhm.
dresses cool, he seems hip, he's in the
Yeah.
know. He's
yeah,
like everyone seems to respect him, even though he's
Yeah.
kind of an asshole.
Yeah, he
Like he
doesn't take
seems
any
like
shit.
untouchable.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, he's a
Yeah.
badass.
There's a part later on where he really cements that. But yeah, even when they like tell like everything, I mean, it's Robert Downey Jr., so all his lines are pretty like dismissive of whatever's happening in the scene.
Right, right.
And even then, like, it's that thing where at one point, Roger Avery like kind of gives too much information out, and then like because they're sending the letters to the newspaper, so the cops are kind of helping them, and then at one point Roger Avery kind of steps over that line, and it becomes this thing where you realize like how one little misstep can mess up an entire investigation, especially when like it's
Yeah.
across 3 different cities, but then like Mark Ruffalo has to answer for Robert Downey Jr.'s actions, and it's like, oh yeah, this thing is like kind of falling apart, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's a good line because he essentially gets a scoop that's like an unverifiable, like the Zodiac did this murder 10 years ago or something,
Yeah.
something like that. I don't even remember the details, but the police are reading it. They're like, did you know about this? It's like, no, he didn't tell any of us about this. And it's like, well, how do we know it's true? And the cop's like, I know it's true because I read it in the paper. Like, just
Right,
like annoyed. It's like,
Right.
yeah, now the entire public, this is like
And-
cemented
And
as
Right.
facts.
I think
in
that
their
that's great
minds,
because
you know?
it kind of underlines the point of the movie. Because as the investigation starts, you know, there starts being more time. You know, at first it's like a month later, and then after a while it starts being like 2 years later, 1 year later. It shows that, and this is where we start moving to the second half of the book or the movie, where
Yeah.
it becomes
Mhm.
less about like the crimes themselves and more about just trying to stop this guy, even as it gets further and further from being likely. And I think that makes it important because a lot of times in the second half, the people start jumping onto this clue or that clue. That's like, and Jake Gyllenhaal's like the worst at this, where it's like, should you really be pulling this thread? Like, one of the big things is that one point he mentions The Most Dangerous Game, the book in the movie, where
Yeah.
it's like about a rich guy who hunts humans. And like everyone kind of, or like Jake Gyllenhaal especially, like really attaches himself to that clue. But it's also like, it was a pretty popular movie. Like, I'm sure a lot of people saw it.
Yeah, I read that story in school,
Yes.
like in 9th grade, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. He's almost like the proto true
Yeah.
Right.
crime nerd who's like just there's a million annoying podcasts about that today because he's even like, hey, Robert Downey Jr., have you heard of the water theory that he
Right.
only kills
Right.
near water?
And then he
It's
goes,
like, shut
You
up.
mean like a 3/4 cherry in Washington? And Gyllenhaal's like, you think? It's like, no.
Yeah, just like
Yeah.
everything has to
Right,
mean
yeah,
something,
just
you know. And it's
connecting
just and
yards
it's
on
funny
a
because it's
chalkboard or whatever.
if this were a fictional movie, like that would
Right.
pay
Yeah.
off. But it's true life, so
Yeah.
none of that shit matters.
Well, yeah,
like almost
because
none of it matters.
you're
You
building
know?
this, idea of, it's kind of like in Seven, funnily enough. There's that scene where they're talking about catching the killer, and Morgan Freeman's kind of like, if John Joe sits down and he is the devil himself, that would probably explain, like, that would satisfy our
Yeah.
curiosity.
That would meet your expectations.
But he's not, and it's like, that's kind of what this movie's about. It's constantly hitting you over the
Totally.
head, where it's like, you guys are going the wrong way. Like, I think of that book, Chaos, which is about, let's shit on Chaos for a second. It's about how Charles Manson might have been controlled by the CIA, but like, the more you read that actual book, the more you realize that it's like, oh, this isn't a book about Charles Manson possibly being a CIA covert. This is a book about confirmation bias and how some guys can't see it even while they're in it. And near the end of the
Totally.
book,
Yeah.
there's a part where he's talking to his dad and he kind of lays out his entire case. And then as he's like writing, he's like, yeah, my dad was like, oh, that's good, son. And then as his dad is like taking him back to the airport to go home, the dad tells him like, you know, even if it's not true, at least you believe it. And then the author's like, hell yeah, now that my dad was on my side, I
Right.
knew I could take it all the way.
I had the
Like,
strength. Yeah.
your dad was not on your side, buddy. Your dad was on your side in a way.
It's just like,
Well, it's
at
like
least you're not doing crack.
for a very similar example, the movie we covered, Link
Right.
Here, JFK, because that movie is literally about. And it's funny because Oliver Stone believes this, but yeah, that lawyer was like convinced that this group of like 5 guys
Yeah.
in New Orleans killed JFK, and just everything became about how that's like it's like, yeah, the CIA is just weird, but he would almost dismiss like stuff that didn't fit. These
Right.
5
Yeah.
guys did
Right.
it versus, it's like you're just selecting evidence you want to see versus
Which
like,
is why I
looking at
always
the
think
whole,
like the JFK one's kind of an exception, but like a lot of the 9/11 and those kind of more true or like more modern conspiracies based on real events, the problem with a lot of them ends up being kind of like the Manson thing too. It's like, okay, but a lot of these line up, but you're missing huge ones that don't line up, and you're intentionally jumping
Right.
around them so that you don't have to think about how it doesn't line up, and it's like,
Right.
that's kind of what Robert Graysmith kind of ends up doing. And there's like, then we kind of start honing in on this one suspect. His name's Arthur Lee Allen, and they suspect it, and then we get into another one of the best scenes in the film, which is where they go talk to him. And
Yeah.
that scene is it's that Joe Carroll guy, and he's so good in it because he goes from and Fincher kind of told them to play it 3 ways. He told him play it first as if he was innocent, second as he was guilty, and third as if he wasn't sure whether he was one or the other. And then he spliced those takes together so that
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
That's pretty
That's
cool.
so Fincher.
I know.
Yeah.
He has to make it
That's
so
240
complicated.
takes right there.
What a dick.
But one of the great things about it is that it kind of starts where he walks in and he's kind of like,
He looks scared.
Yeah,
he looks scared when they first go get him out of his.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as he kind of starts interacting with these cops, like at the very beginning, he's like, oh, by the way, I had knives because I was fishing or something.
Yes. That's the best scene ever. It's
He's
just like,
giving like
the bloody knife is in my trunk from when I killed a chicken for dinner.
Yeah.
And everyone's just like, what?
Yeah.
You at the audience, you're like, what the fuck are you talking? And he also he mentions that he goes skin diving, and it's like, I don't want to imagine you skin diving, man.
Yeah.
Like, he's obviously so crazy just for killing chickens and skin diving that like, that's all the proof I really need.
But that's also like, that's just any rural guy in the 60s, so you're like, is this like serial killer great? Yeah,
and then as it goes on, he kind of starts to like, his shoulders get a little bit broader, and he starts to kind of take control of the conversation. And like the way he ends it is like, they ask him one question and he goes, I'm not the Zodiac, but if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you. And it's like,
yes, I love that so much.
That line is so
good.
Scary because he has and like he has that confidence, and then it keeps like, and the framing even is like, at first, it's a huge wide, and you see all 3 of them kind of sitting, and then as he kind of takes more control, it becomes these singles. So you see both the cops, and it ends up being like they're both fighting for control of the scene.
Right.
And again, it's just people talking. Like, there's no action, they're just sitting there, but it's such a tense scene, and the way that they play it is so good. It's just kind of like, it solidifies the movie,
Totally, yeah. I think that even John Carroll Lynch like looks into the camera at one point when he says, I wouldn't tell you.
Right.
And I also really love the detail that this is, and that's what's so good about like them building up Arthur Lee Allen's character, is that like he does seem normal, like he has this normal job,
right?
But then he kills chickens, which is a little weird, not unexplainable, but a little weird.
Yeah.
And then like whenever they compliment his watch, which has the Zodiac symbol on it, he's like, it was a gift from my mother. which isn't that weird, but it's like, okay, this guy's never gotten married and he's like super old now.
Right.
And he's kind of a creepy guy. Like, why didn't he buy this watch himself?
Well, he was also
Fired for
fired.
touching his kids. Yeah.
He was like a
Or touching
pedophile
students. Yeah.
for like a
It's like
school.
his character just like slowly unravels.
Still a bad
Right,
guy, no matter
Well,
what.
I don't think William was saying he was a
Funny how
good
they do
guy.
that.
It was just that, like,
Right.
Oh, you're just like, he's a normal guy. I'm like, no, he's a weirdo. Even if he's
when
not
do you
a
learn about
serial
the
killer.
student stuff? Do you learn that before or after?
It's after.
I think they kind of throw it out there. Yeah, they throw it out at the end of the scene, and then you find out after. Oh, they knew all along that this was, but it's kind of dropped on
I
you
think
at the
after
same
that
time,
meeting,
you
he
know?
ends up going to jail for a couple of years for the touching kids thing, and that's when like a lot of Zodiac stuff stops. So that kind of gives more credence. Oh no! They find out later, and then they find out that while he was in jail, was a weird dry period where the Zodiac didn't send letters, he didn't kill anyone. And then, like the same month that Lee Allen got out, someone started sending Zodiac letters again. So it's kind of that thing where and that's kind of the funny thing is I know a lot of complaints about this movie is that Fincher doesn't make a decision, but I think it's that media literary thing because Graysmith definitely makes the decision on who he thinks the Zodiac killer is.
Yeah,
and Fincher
it's pretty
kind
clear.
of follows his lead. Like there's no
right.
That's funny because, I would argue it almost is too obvious that Fincher's like, oh, this guy did it, because I'm almost certain that it's the same actor in all the scenes where a man in shadows kills or almost kills people.
Yeah.
Like I'm pretty sure
which was a trick you learned from Seven because Kevin Spacey plays John Doe in earlier scenes where you don't see his face, and if you really pay attention, it is Kevin Spacey. You could tell it's Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, when he takes the pictures on the staircase. And,
Mm-hmm.
There's like one shot where he runs down the stairs and you can make out his face. But that's the only time.
Yeah. And then, they also never, there's another suspect that comes up later. Jumping ahead just a quick tiny bit.
Yeah.
Like that Rick Marshall guy is another suspect, but they never even show him. Yeah, there's no actor playing him.
Yeah.
I think me and Josh about to agree. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was gonna say it's almost like I feel like the movie should be longer to almost introduce more doubt, to show like it kind of like shows some false leads, but it's still clearly driving towards like, oh, this guy did it, and here's all the important scenes so you know that like it's this guy. Whereas, and because a lot of it is very like, oh, they kind of mention it offhand, and it's like I almost feel like if you're gonna have the second half of your movie be about kind of the tedium and frustration of like chasing a story that doesn't exist across like 30 years of police work, you almost need to do more of that doesn't go anywhere because you need to be.
I do kind of agree. I think it's so like as we're kind of moving around, like they get more information, they're kind of chasing leads, and then as we move, like Mark Ruffalo's character ends up like getting kicked off the case. He starts writing himself fan letters because he likes attention. And then they accuse him of
I know, Zodiac, that's so embarrassing.
And also they like go to Dirty Harry and he's like, this movie's not that cool. Which I think is funny to just add.
No use for due process, am I right?
Yeah.
And so and then Roger Avery eventually like kind of drinks himself out of the job. And so it really ends up being just Robert Graysmith because all the other cops have other cop shit to worry about. So Robert Graysmith kind of takes over the investigation. And that's where they find out about Rick Marshall. And I think, like, watching it again, I think they kind of speed through the Rick Marshall stuff. And they have that really cool scene where, like, he's trying to find Rick Marshall's handwriting to compare it to the Zodiac. And he goes to, like, his friend who was in the theater. And then the friend is like, oh, I write the posters. Rick Marshall never wrote them. And then Jake Gyllenhaal's like, oh, shit, it kind of matches. Like,
I gotta go.
Yeah, I gotta go.
It was the closest they'd ever gotten. Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's one of those scenes that doesn't totally like, because it's like, he goes to this creepy guy's, but he's like, oh, they're in the basement, come follow me, and it's like, yeah, but I know this is a true story, and I know he didn't die in that basement, because he's like the
it's like you're definitely seeing it through the eyes of Jake Gyllenhaal's anxiety for sure.
Yeah, it just can't be anything, and it's like, to me, it's more tense when it's like a police investigation or conversation versus like, is this guy the killer? It's like, well, no, I know he's not, because Jake would have like. They would have blown the investigation open at that point,
Because then there's another scene, like kind of a little bit after that, where Jake Gyllenhaal goes to talk to one of the girls who survived. Or no, she had talked to someone else, and so she knew about the Zodiac. And so he's like, what did you say the Zodiac's name was? She was like, it was a small name, and she's trying to think of it, and he's like, it's Rick, and she's like, no, it's
Yeah.
not Rick, and he's like,
No, it's
it's
not
Rick
Rick.
Marshall, just say it. And it's like,
Yeah.
I know what they're
He
trying
just
to do
wants
with
it to
that
be.
scene, that
Yeah.
he's so desperate. But because we didn't spend the time to kind of look at a lot of the other suspects with the same amount of effort we put into Lee Allen, it just kind of looks like Jake Gyllenhaal will, like, any piece of information he gets, he's like, oh, it's that guy now.
Right.
You know?
Right. And it's like we were talking about, like, the theories being built.
They
Like, it's like you're
also
building like a building. Like, you're like,
Right.
when you're constructing this theory, it's like you're building the Empire State Building. And it's like, if all of a sudden, like, you realize that, like, the foundation is wrong, it's like you now have to demolish, like,
Right.
years of thought process. And it's like, I think that's like what this is like really showing, is like how those like ideas can like just stick. And like, you, if your own mind's patterns sake, like, it has to be what you think. It can't be something else, or else
Yeah.
you're fucked.
Right. And I think it's that thing where, because she tells him, he's like, I want to ask you some questions about the Zodiac. And she says, oh, yeah, you got that look about you. And he's like, what look? But at this point, like, we've seen Jake Gyllenhaal go from, like, dating his wife to having a family to using the family to help him investigate to losing his family because of this investigation. Right. And it's like,
and Paul Avery lost everything too, and Toschi hates himself. Like, everyone just like loses their entire lives.
They're lively. Yeah. And it's like, when he goes like, what look?
Right.
It's like, really? You don't know at this point? Because you should, you know?
Right. You look like a psycho.
Yeah. And I think that kind of like helps tell the story of him. But it's almost like he's telling two stories, you know? Like, he's kind of building this case against Lee Allen, but he's also kind of telling the story about this obsession. And I think just during the Rick Marshall parts is the only time where they're too far apart to really work. But it's also like, it's hard because like you do want to cover that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like you could tell he was almost straining against, like, okay, I still need to keep this like under 3 hours,
right?
Like normal movie length, and like and kind of like wrap it up in a way. But I feel like this is such a not story shaped story that it's almost like futile to almost like try to fit that kind of sequence into.
But I will say that it is almost, I mean, I think Fincher is probably one of the best living directors that we have right now. And so it is interesting how much of a story he's able to craft from an unsolved case.
Out of like an unended thing. Well, and it really does, like, it culminates in, and it does, like, I guess I see why he wanted to end it this way, although I don't think this wasn't the right call to me, because ultimately, like, after he realizes, like, oh, it's not the girl tells him it's Lee Allen.
When he says it's Rick, she goes, no, it's Lee.
Oh, it was a short
when
name.
He's leaving, when
Lee,
he's leaving,
and then he's like, and he basically just goes and like looks at him at work. It's just like a weird, like, it's like, but that's not where it ends.
Though, because whenever, like, once again, it's like, I feel like this is what the movie does so well, is like it shows John Carroll Lynch just like, it's that whole thing, like, it could be literally anybody, and like he's just the friendly guy at the hardware store, and it's like, we know that he's crazy, but like when he turns around, he gives him like this like genuine smile, and he's like, hey, how can I help you? And there's another part where they go to his trailer, and his trailer's fucked up inside, and there's like squirrels and shit. But whenever Arthur Lee Allen comes home, he's just in his car with groceries, and he has these like little pathetic shorts on, and like, just guy. He's just fucking guy.
Well, see, and
I love how they play it. It's so good.
I think, like, because Josh said he didn't like that scene, but I think that, to me, that's one of the most important scenes in the movie for two reasons. The first,
I do like that scene.
Is that earlier, like, when his wife is telling Jake Gyllenhaal, like, why are you still chasing this story? Jake Gyllenhaal says, because she goes, like, at this point, there's no, like, you're not, even if you knew who it was, you can't, like, there's not enough evidence. Like, the witnesses are dying, it's getting older, you know? And Jake Gyllenhaal says, I just want to look at him and know that it's him. And so he goes into that hardware store, and it's such a good scene because Carroll Lynch is like, he's like, hi, how are you? And Jake Gyllenhaal doesn't say anything. And Carroll Lynch realizes what he's doing, because at this point also, someone has been calling their house for like years. And you see him, like, and he's like, hey, and then he like realizes what Jake Gyllenhaal is doing. And his face changes.
his shoulders get more broad, and you see him become this Zodiac character
Right.
in the
Right.
same outfit, the same clothes, and it's just so chilling. And like,
For real.
you almost feel like scared for Jake Gyllenhaal because you're like, man, you should not have done this. You know, like,
Yeah.
he's a monster.
And it's also like the most angry that Jake Gyllenhaal is. Like that's like the only
Yeah,
thing he's
no,
like, threatening
it's
in the movie himself. Like
Yeah.
he doesn't seem scary compared to John Carroll Lynch, but like that's like the scariest he tries to make himself, where he's just like
Yeah.
just mugging him. And it's like, this is intense. This is a good scene.
Yeah.
that's like now and see, because that scene's so impactful. That is a good scene, and it's so impactful. I remembered that being the last scene, but it's
Yeah.
not. There is one scene after that where another cop working it it's the guy from the very
Yeah.
first scene who got shot but lived. The cop's like, can you identify this man? And they have it played by God, what's that guy?
Yeah, I think it is
Something like that. I looked it up too.
Simpson, I think. Yeah,
I love
Jimmy
him.
Simpson,
He's such a cool
the
actor.
McPoyle
He's so
guy
weird.
from Westworld. But he's such a distinctive character actor face that I was like, I don't even know who this is supposed to be, because he looks nothing like the young one. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess it's that, but it's like, don't use a guy who looks so striking to be your vital, like, this is the older version. Because he's like, yeah, that's the man. But again, that's one of those where it's like, I mean, that was 30 years ago. Again, confirmation.
And it's like,
bias,
it's 1991
you'll
at that
remember
point
what
in
you
that scene.
see.
Like, which is 10 years after he confronts him.
Right, literally.
And,
like, 30 years.
I love that scene, the way it ends the movie, because it ties you back to the very end. And they even they play the
right, it's the
song,
bookends.
and he's like, the last time I saw this man was when he shot me in 1969. And then it just starts playing the music, and it's like, what a cool way, because the whole movie, it's like, we're never gonna find this guy. And like, regardless of whether it's Arthur Lee Allen or not, the movie is saying that it's Arthur Lee Allen, so it's giving you that answer. And it's like, it doesn't even really like leave it, because then it's like they go into the after.
But no, then the postscript is, to me, that's the part where it's like, oh, and here's all the evidence. Yeah, here's all the people, they died before they could testify, that this evidence didn't match, this did. And it's like, the postscript is about how you'll never really know, but it's also like, that still happens after the book ends. So it's like, narratively, that's kind of the end of the story, is that you still don't know. But Fincher's like, no, it was this guy. It's like, he wanted to do both.
It does.
And I don't
and
think
I wonder,
you can do
because
both.
like,
Does that
reading
make
the
sense?
Wikipedia a little bit about Fincher, like in this story, it's like he is kind of like Graysmith in a way, where he was also like it seems like he was kind of like at least he grew up in an era where this was like an obsessive worthy case. So it's like, I don't know. It's like he also wants, like, he knows that he'll never know, but he also wants it to be the answer. So it's kind of like a little peek into his head of like,
like, it has to be him for me. Yeah, no, and that is interesting. And it's almost like you could tell that he got caught up in Zodiac mania, like, researching this, and like wanted to like make the audience feel the same way. And you do. Like,
for sure.
An incredible director.
I will say that the book kind of the book is, and I know that he based it off of the two books. I mean, he mainly based it off Zodiac, but then Graysmith wrote another one called Zodiac Unleashed, where he kind of added more clues to why he thinks it's Arthur Lee Allen.
Okay.
But I will say that the book is even more like ambiguous, because you can tell that Robert Graysmith is writing it in real time, and that he never really went back, because of the fact that, like, if you want chasing subjects or chasing suspects that don't go anywhere, read the book, because that's all. Like, he's chasing so many people.
Well, even like the second half, and we really glossed over it. I would say a good 30 minutes is just spent with Jake talking to different handwriting experts. You're just like, oh yeah, this is boring, because it would be boring to do that.
And you're like, oh my god, I don't care.
And also, one of them, because they're both famous. The two big ones he talks to are one is that old guy from No, but the other is John Ennis from Mr. Show, who also played the Big Bopper in Walk Hard. So I immediately was like, hey, the Big Bopper.
And he plays the Big Bopper.
Another character actor.
I'm gonna get in trouble. He's like eating a sandwich. It's like all the cops are kind of like, they're one step away from being cartoon characters. I love it.
And I think to me, it's frustrating because this is a masterful movie, but it's about how boring police work goes nowhere, and you don't really ever get an answer.
See,
And it's just
I don't know. I mean, you keep saying that they don't
you
get an
really
answer, but
nailed that.
we got an answer in this movie. It's like a weird, I think it's that thing where a lot of people, and maybe this is why people don't like it. To me, I don't care how much of your story is true, even if it's based on a true story. I care how good the story is. Like, that's why I like Social Network, even though now we know that he wasn't chasing Rooney Mara, he was chasing Hitler.
Never had a soul.
Right,
But it's like
technocracy.
That doesn't change the fact that Social Network's a good movie about like a loser. It's just a different.
Right, exactly.
No, I do agree. I think having your ending be it's this guy, and then having the postscript text be like, but maybe it's not. Who knows? Well, it's like we'll just do one or the other.
The last thing that they say in the postscript is that like, oh, after he died, Grace Smith never got another phone call. So I think like it's still putting that period on it. Like, I don't know, guys. Maybe it was, and I think
we can't definitively say, but
and it is.
Here's
like,
the T.
Yeah, it's that dividing. Like how much.
Like it's like a story someone tells you at a bar in a way.
I think it's but it's almost so authentic because obviously there's like based on a true story, like the Tetris movie where they're literally like outrunning the Russian mob in like car chases where you're like, oh, this is just stupid garbage. Whereas this movie feels like super authentic down to like every scene.
Yeah. And maybe that's the thing. I think this is the best way that anyone could have ever told the story of the Zodiac Killer, considering we never know who it actually was. But the question is,
that's fair.
The question on whether you like it or not is how much do you care about this story?
Right. Yeah.
And that is true. And as a not true crime person, like my interest is more like kind of in the obsession side of it, where it's like I'm more interested in seeing their like falling apart than like is he going to solve it? Like it's like I don't care about the evidence and stuff.
And you lose track of the evidence so easily too. Like there's a part at the end whenever Jake Gyllenhaal the whole movie is almost over. And then all of a sudden, Jake Gyllenhaal gets a letter in the mail, and it's a picture of Arthur Lee Allen's driver's license, and it shows Arthur Lee Allen's birthday.
Yeah.
And he's like, all of a sudden, everything clicks for Jake Gyllenhaal, and he runs to Mark Ruffalo's house, and he's like, I just found out this guy's birthday, and it's the birthday that was told on a phone call a long time ago. And I was like, I thought y'all already knew his birthday. Like, I had no idea that this was even a good piece of evidence for you.
Yeah.
And it's like, at that point, I was like, wait, the evidence doesn't matter in this movie. Like, that's, it's all about the psychotic nature of this obsession.
Well, it's even like, they meet the guy who's like, oh, I was old fishing buddies with him. And he's like, by the way, I'm going to become the Zodiac. And I told him, hey, the Zodiac's like a stupid name. And the guy's like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's just like, but that guy like never is able to testify. It's one of those like that still goes nowhere. But
and
it's
I
like,
do
that
see that as more of
like
a problem where like
the
there's that
gun,
part where he's like, oh, we always thought that he knew the first killer, but maybe the first victim was this person, and he literally lived 20 feet away, like 20 steps outside of the bar where she worked. But then it's like
50 yards or something.
It's that weird thing where it's like, okay, how strong is this evidence? Because the movie's kind of presenting it as this, like, this evidence is 100%. Like, he lived outside the door. He was obsessed with her. But it's like, okay, and maybe that's what Josh is kind of pointing to. It's like, okay, but if the evidence was this strong, like, are you trying to say that the cops are dumb? Or was the evidence not that strong?
Is it all circumstantial?
Which one could it be? Yeah.
You just need to complete your story.
Right.
That's like because my father is former law enforcement, and he once wrote a book about this like cold case that eventually got solved. And I read it, I don't read true crime, but of course I'm going to read it. His book. It's my father, right? And one of it was like literally the cops went in and saw like blood stains in the garage until like the wife's like, get out of here. And then it took like 30 years before they could like go through the steps to finally like put them on the stand, and it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, that sucks. And also, why did I have to read 30 years of like them filing briefs before? Like, it's just like, and that's kind of like so much of the movie is this, and it's like, yeah, because that's how it really happens. Because bureaucracy sucks and is slow, but also, it's just there's only so much, and Fincher is such a good director.
Yeah.
It's still like pretty compelling the whole time, but
yeah. I mean, you can tell this is an important story.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
True crime's lame. True crime's lame, and anyone who likes
true
it is
crime,
lame, right?
you have to kind of look at it.
It's cool
because I'm not the hugest fan of. I mean, I do it for research and stuff, but I'm not the hugest fan of like just random true crime. It's why like I'll try to read. I just try to be informed, but like a lot of times, it's like once you get into it, you're like, oh, that probably just was a crazy guy, like like oh, it's just the cops and like reading more about the Manson murders is intriguing because you realize like. Oh yeah, they could have had Manson like 8 times in a row. They're just stupid. Like like one of the big things was the cops working the Shannon Tate murders and the cops working the Bianca murders didn't talk to each other despite being in the same room, and it both like they had like very similar stuff. And it's like this isn't a story about a genius cult. This is a story about stupid cops. Like they find the gun, and then like the kid had watched a lot of. Hawaii 5-0, so he knew not to like touch the gun. He like used the stick to like pick it up by the hand or pick it up by the bullet. I mean by the trigger. And then the cop who came to pick it up just grabbed it by the hand and like put it in a bag. And it's like
God.
or like
listen to some podcasts, you idiot.
Yeah.
Well, they even talk about in this movie after the picnic stabbing, like, oh yeah, the sheriff just rolled up the picnic blanket and threw it all in his trunk.
And that's
like,
why I think it's interesting to kind of, you have to look at the whole picture, like even with OJ Simpson, like even though that was just one murder, but it's interesting to see like what OJ's status was. Like he was kind of like viewed this way, and like he used like racism that he had never like quite experienced as much as other people. But you need to know all that to understand, like, they ended up letting OJ off, probably him being guilty, I don't know, but they probably let him off because they kind of fed into this narrative of how black men were discriminated against in the legal system, which is 100% true, but it was probably not 100% true in terms of OJ.
It's different if you're an NFL movie star. You're not somebody from
Southside celebrity football.
And without that context, you're just kind of like, well, duh, of course. But like with that context, it makes that a story about the American system, much less a story about one individual crime. And, like to me, that's always more important. But I think that's why I like this movie, because it kind of does the same thing. Like we see that glimpse behind the curtain of what it would take to catch someone like this. And I think, I think that's an interesting aspect to follow, especially like with this, where there's no answer, we still don't know.
Yeah.
It is funny that Gray Smith wrote a second book. That's a very like Leonard Nimoy writing "I'm not Spock" and then following it up with "I am Spock," where he's like, I just need money. I don't want to do political cartoons again.
It's like the guy
how many books did he write?
Please buy my book.
I think he ended up writing. He did that thing that a lot of these guys do, where like the guy who wrote Helter Skelter, then he just started writing. Like he wrote a book about Bush, and he wrote a book about the Nixon administration. It's like, why are you an authority on any of this? Like, what the hell?
Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah, I like Robert Graysmith writing like Zodiac. If I did it, it's just like I thought it was funny. John Carroll Lynch. There's this American Horror Story. There's this terrible season at the hotel where all the dead serial killers, like on Halloween night, come to like have a feast together, and he actually plays John Wayne Gacy. And then someone else is there playing like Zodiac, wearing the stupid outfit and like not speaking, because you're never supposed to know who Zodiac is. And it's like, I wonder if John Carroll Lynch was like on that set being like, God, I've like played that in like a amazing film, like a career-defining film, and now here I am sitting at Crossroads.
Roger Graysmith ended up writing a book about Bob Crane, was a star of Hogan Heroes, The Unabomber, The Bell Tower, The Case of Jack the Ripper. So yeah, I think like once they write, it's
gotcha. He found a genre. Yeah.
He's like, look, I don't want to. He didn't want to draw like H.W. Bush pulling a lever that said like new taxes on it. So he's like, please,
I'll study these horrific
don't make me go back to
instead.
just don't,
Yeah.
don't make me draw Obama with the
But yeah,
giant ears.
it's a wild movie.
Right?
I would say this movie is like when
So yeah.
I don't know, it is so on the surface level just so boring and dry. But like when you're watching it, it's just like this is the best thing I've ever seen. And I can totally see like it's so important to Fincher. You can tell the story is like so close to his heart. I think he like grew up in that area during that time. And I can see why he was bummed that people didn't think it was as cool as he was hoping that they would. But it really is like one of his best movies. Like
I like it.
it's so compelling when it's about not much. Yeah.
I mean, all his movies are good. I haven't seen a couple, but all the ones I've seen, he's never gonna deliver just a total dog.
Totally.
Even
I don't
Mank
hate the
has
Curious
some
Case of
Mankish
Benjamin Button,
charms.
even though I know a lot of people do.
So. Oh, I actually do,
I saw
but
it
it's
once. I
not.
liked it. I probably won't see it.
It's not his fault. It's structural. It's more. It's like the CGI wasn't quite there to do all this stuff.
I saw it
so
in theaters, I'm not ever craving that button.
Yeah, I don't ever want to push that button again.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you guys for joining us on the Zodiac. Hopefully you guys can find them. If you know what the Zodiac is, put it in the comments.
Yeah, let us know.
It
was Earthly
Throw
Out.
us a subscribe
But
and
was it?
put the
Yeah.
You just see like Ted Cruz commenting. It was me the whole time, actually.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on The Bump Squad.